The divorce papers were supposed to arrive next Tuesday. Instead, I found my wife packing her designer luggage while humming along to some pop song like she was heading to a spa weekend. The irony wasn't lost on me. Lydia had always been tone deaf, both literally and figuratively. "Tom, we need to talk," she said, not bothering to look up from her suitcase. She was folding her clothes with the same mechanical precision she used for everything else in our marriage. Efficient, cold, predictable. I leaned against the door frame of our bedroom, wiping grease from my hands with an old shop rag. I'd been under the hood of Mrs. Patterson's Buick all afternoon, and the smell of motor oil clung to my clothes like a second skin. "Let me guess," I said, my voice flat. "You need space." She finally looked at me then, her perfectly manicured eyebrows raised in surprise. "How did you—" Lucky guess. I walked to the window and stared out at our neighbor Mrs. Fenwick's garden. The old woman was pretending to water her roses, but I could see her straining to catch whatever drama was about to unfold. In a town like Millbrook, Maine, entertainment was scarce, and marital discord was premium content. Lydia cleared her throat. "I've been thinking a lot lately about what I want from life, about who I am, about what makes me happy. And apparently, none of those things include your husband. Don't be dramatic, Tom. This is just a trial separation. I need time to figure things out." She zipped up her suitcase with a sharp, final sound. "I'm going to stay with Aubrey for a while." Aubrey? Of course. Lydia's best friend since college, the woman who'd been whispering poison in my wife's ear for the past 2 years. Aubrey, who'd gone through 3 divorces and considered herself an expert on finding yourself and living your truth, and all the other self-help bullshit that had infected my marriage like a virus. "How long is a while?" I asked. Lydia shrugged. "I don't know. A few weeks, maybe a month. However long it takes. However long what takes." She turned to face me fully then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not sadness or regret or even guilt. It was excitement. The kind of excitement a kid gets on Christmas morning, knowing there are presents waiting under the tree. However long it takes for me to remember who I used to be before I became Mrs. Tom Bishop, wife of a small-town mechanic. The words hit me like a slap, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned long ago not to give Lydia the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. "Well," I said, "if that's what you want." "It is." "Then consider it done." She blinked, clearly expecting more of a fight. "Just like that?" "Just like that." I pulled out my phone and started typing. "I'm canceling your health insurance right now. Joint credit cards too. If you want to find yourself, you should probably do it on your own dime." Her mouth fell open. "Tom, you can't just—" "Can't what?" "Respect your wishes?" I kept typing, my fingers moving across the screen with mechanical efficiency. Bank accounts. Done. Netflix password. Changed. Gym membership. Cancelled. I looked up at her shocked face. "You wanted independence, sweetheart. I'm just helping you achieve it." "This is ridiculous. I'm your wife." "Are you?" "Because 5 minutes ago you were packing your bags and talking about finding yourself." "Make up your mind, Lydia. You can't have it both ways." She stared at me for a long moment, her face cycling through confusion, anger, and finally settling on cold determination. "Fine. Maybe this will be good for both of us. Maybe you'll realize what you're losing." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I just nodded toward her suitcase. "Need help carrying that to your car?" "I can manage." "I'm sure you can. You've always been very capable when it comes to managing things." I paused, letting the words sink in. "By the way, I changed the locks on the house. You know, for security. Can't be too careful these days." The color drained from her face. "You what?" "Well, you don't live here anymore, right? Wouldn't want any confusion about that." She grabbed her suitcase and stormed past me, her heels clicking angrily on the hardwood floor. I followed her downstairs and watched through the window as she threw her bag into the trunk of her BMW. Aubrey was waiting in the passenger seat, and even from a distance I could see her grinning like she'd just won the lottery. As they drove away, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat down at my computer. Time for a little digital archaeology. Lydia had always been careless with passwords, and she'd never bothered to change our shared cloud storage login. What I found there made the bourbon taste like battery acid. Dozens of text messages with someone named Chad, hotel receipts from the Ocean View Inn, photos I definitely hadn't taken, and a document titled Trip List that made my blood run cold. The most recent entry was dated today. Chad's place, finally free. I took another sip of bourbon and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "You want space, Lydia?" I said to the empty house. "Let me show you what space really looks like." The next morning, I was under the hood of a Ford pickup when Mickey, my best mechanic and the closest thing I had to a friend, rolled out from under a Camaro on his creeper. "So," he said, wiping his hands on a greasy rag, "heard Lydia moved out." I didn't look up from the engine I was working on. News travels fast. "Mrs. Fenwick stopped by this morning. Said she saw quite the scene yesterday." Mickey was grinning. I could hear it in his voice. "Also said she saw Lydia's BMW parked outside some fancy apartment complex on Harbor Street last night. Real late. Harbor Street. That's where all the young professionals lived, in those overpriced condos with names like Ocean View Towers and Millbrook Heights. I'd done work on a few cars from that neighborhood. Entitled pricks who complained about labor costs while driving vehicles worth more than most people's houses. Interesting, I said. You gonna do anything about it? I straightened up and looked at Mickey. He was a good guy, loyal as a dog, but not the sharpest tool in the shed. Still, he had his uses. What would you suggest? Well, if it was me, I'd probably want to know who she's shacking up with. And how would one go about finding that out? Mickey's grin widened. Funny you should ask. Remember that tracking system you had me install in Lydia's car last year, after it got stolen from the mall parking lot? I'd completely forgotten about that. After Lydia's BMW had been stolen and recovered, I'd insisted on having a GPS tracker installed for security purposes. She'd rolled her eyes but agreed, probably because the insurance company offered a discount for vehicles with anti-theft devices. That system's still active? I asked. Far as I know, want me to check? 20 minutes later, Mickey had pulled up the tracking app on his tablet. Lydia's car was currently parked at Harbor Towers, Unit 12B. It had been there since 11:30 the previous night. Huh, I said. That's interesting. I thought she was staying with Aubrey. Maybe she is. Maybe Aubrey lives at Harbor Towers now. I shook my head. Aubrey lives in that little house on Pine Street, has for years. I wiped my hands clean and pulled out my phone. Time for a little reconnaissance. The Harbor Towers parking lot was easy to access, and Lydia's BMW was right where the tracker said it would be. I parked my truck across the street and waited. I didn't have to wait long. At 12:30, Lydia emerged from the building's main entrance, but she wasn't alone. The man with her was tall, well-dressed, and had the kind of carefully styled hair that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. He was carrying a briefcase and checking his phone like he was late for something important. They kissed goodbye at her car. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, but a full-on, hands-in-hair, tongue-wrestling session that made me want to reach for the bourbon I kept in my glove compartment. After Lydia drove away, the man got into a silver Tesla and headed in the opposite direction. I followed him. He drove to the offices of Millbrook Digital Solutions, a tech startup that had moved to town about 2 years ago, bringing with it a bunch of young professionals who thought they were going to revolutionize small-town Maine with their innovative ideas and disruption strategies. The kind of people who used words like synergy and paradigm shift in casual conversation. The Tesla's owner parked in a spot marked Reserved C. Larkin, CEO. Chad Larkin. So that was my wife's new boyfriend. The CEO of a tech company, probably making 10 times what I made fixing cars. No wonder Lydia was excited about her trial separation. I sat in my truck for a while, watching the building and thinking. Then I pulled out my phone and did a little research on Mr. Chad Larkin. What I found was interesting. Very interesting. Millbrook Digital Solutions was hemorrhaging money. They'd burned through their initial investment capital and were desperately seeking new funding. Chad Larkin had a history of failed startups and a reputation for making big promises he couldn't keep. His LinkedIn profile was full of buzzwords and inspirational quotes, but his actual track record was pretty thin. More importantly, there were rumors on some tech forums about his personal life. Apparently, Mr. Larkin had a thing for married women. There were whispers about affairs, broken marriages, and a pattern of behavior that painted him as a predator who targeted unhappy wives. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lydia. "Tom, my car won't start. Can you come take a look at it?" I smiled and typed back, "Sorry, busy with paying customers. Maybe call AAA?" She didn't respond. What she didn't know was that I'd used the tracking app to remotely disable her car's ignition system. It was a feature I'd had Mickey install after the theft, ostensibly for security purposes. If the car was ever stolen again, I could shut it down remotely and help the police recover it. Funny how useful security features could be in other situations. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Aubrey. "Tom, what the hell is wrong with you?" she said without preamble. "Good afternoon to you too, Aubrey. How can I help you?" "Lydia's stranded at Harbor Towers. Her car won't start and you won't come help her. What kind of husband are you?" "The kind whose wife moved out yesterday and is apparently living with another man. What kind of friend are you, Aubrey? The kind who helps married women cheat on their husbands." There was a long pause. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't. Tell Lydia that if she needs mechanical help, she should call her new boyfriend. I hear tech CEOs are very good with their hands." I hung up and drove back to the garage, whistling an old Johnny Cash song. Ring of Fire seemed appropriate. That evening I stopped by the Mariner's Lie, the local bar where everyone in town went to drink, gossip, and pretend their lives were more interesting than they actually were. Mrs. Fenwick was there, holding court at her usual table near the window, regaling anyone who would listen with the latest neighborhood drama. "Tom," she called out when she saw me, "come sit with us. I was just telling everyone about the excitement at your house yesterday." I ordered a beer and joined her table, which included Bob Hartley from the hardware store, Susan Mills, who worked at the post office, and Dave Porter, who ran the local newspaper. In a town the size of Millbrook, this was basically the information superhighway. "So it's true then?" Susan asked. "Lydia really moved out?" "She did," I said, taking a sip of my beer. "Said she needed to find herself." "And where exactly is she looking?" Mrs. Fenwick asked with barely concealed glee. "Well, according to her car's GPS tracker, she's been spending a lot of time at Harbor Towers. Unit 12B, to be specific." Bob nearly choked on his drink. "That's Chad Larkin's place, the tech guy." "Is it? How interesting." Dave leaned forward, his journalist instincts kicking in. "Are you saying your wife is having an affair with Chad Larkin?" "I'm not saying anything. I'm just sharing publicly available information about the location of my wife's vehicle." Mrs. Fenwick cackled with delight. "Oh, this is better than my soap operas." "Speaking of Chad Larkin," I said casually, "anyone know much about his business?" "Millbrook Digital Solutions?" "Bunch of hot air, if you ask me," Bob said. "They came into my store last month wanting to optimize my retail experience with some fancy computer system. Wanted to charge me $5,000 for something I could do with a calculator and a notebook." "I heard they're having money troubles," Susan added. "My cousin works at the bank, and she said they've been turned down for loans 3 times in the past 6 months. Dave nodded. "There's been talk about them closing down, laying off employees. The whole disrupting small-town commerce thing isn't working out so well." I filed that information away for later use and finished my beer. Well, this has been educational. Thanks for the company, everyone. As I was leaving, Mrs. Fenwick grabbed my arm. Tom, honey, what are you planning to do about this situation? I smiled at her. It was the same smile I'd given Lydia the night before. I'm going to give my wife exactly what she asked for, Mrs. Fenwick. Space. Lots and lots of space. The annual Millbrook Harbor Festival was the biggest event of the year in our little town. Local businesses set up booths. There were games and contests, and everyone came out to eat fried dough and pretend they were having the time of their lives. It was also the perfect place to make a public statement. I spent the morning setting up a booth for Bishop's Auto Repair, complete with a banner Mickey had made that read, "Honest work, fair prices, no drama." The last part was Mickey's idea, and I had to admit it was pretty clever. Lydia showed up around noon, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. She was wearing a sundress that probably cost more than most people's rent, and her hair and makeup were perfect, despite the humid coastal air. She was with Aubrey and a group of other women I recognized from her yoga class or book club or whatever other activities she used to fill her days. She saw me immediately and made a beeline for my booth, her entourage trailing behind her like a pack of well-dressed hyenas. "Tom," she said, her voice artificially sweet. "How nice to see you here. Lydia, you look expensive. New dress?" Her smile faltered slightly. "It's not new." "Huh. Must be the lighting then. Or maybe it's just the glow of independence. How's that working out for you, by the way?" "It's working out very well, thank you for asking." Good. I'm glad to hear it." I leaned against my booth's counter and smiled at her friends. "Ladies, how are you all doing? Getting enough excitement in your lives?" Aubrey stepped forward, clearly appointed as Lydia's spokesperson. "We're doing just fine, Tom. Lydia's been telling us all about her new living situation. It sounds very liberating." "I'll bet it does. Harbor Towers, right? Nice place. I hear the rent's pretty steep, though. Hope you're splitting it with someone." The color drained from Lydia's face, but she recovered quickly. "I don't see how my living arrangements are any of your business." "You're absolutely right. They're not." I reached under my booth's counter and pulled out a manila envelope. "Speaking of things that are and aren't my business, I found some stuff in our shared cloud storage that I thought you might want back." I handed the envelope to Aubrey, who opened it without thinking. Her eyes went wide as she saw the contents, printed screenshots of text messages, hotel receipts, and several photos that were definitely not appropriate for public viewing. "Oh my God," Aubrey whispered, then immediately began passing the papers around to the other women. "Tom!" Lydia lunged for the envelope, but it was too late. Her friends were already reading everything, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock to barely concealed delight. "What is this?" one of them asked, holding up a particularly explicit text message. "That," I said calmly, "appears to be a conversation between my wife and someone named Chad about what they'd like to do to each other in various hotel rooms around town." A crowd was starting to gather around my booth, drawn by the obvious drama unfolding. In a small town, this was better than television. "You had no right to go through my private messages," Lydia hissed. "Private? They were in our shared cloud account, the one we set up for family photos and important documents. I was just looking for the warranty information on our washing machine." "This is humiliating." "Is it? I thought it was liberating. You know, living your truth and all that." That's when Chad Larkin appeared, pushing through the crowd like some kind of white knight coming to rescue his damsel in distress. He was wearing khakis and a polo shirt, trying to look casual and approachable, but I could see the panic in his eyes. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Chad!" Lydia ran to him, and he put his arm around her protectively. "Tom is being horrible. He's sharing our private communications with everyone." Chad turned to me, his jaw set in what he probably thought was an intimidating expression. "You need to stop this right now. This is harassment. I looked him up and down slowly, taking in his perfectly styled hair, his expensive clothes, and his soft, manicured hands. You must be Chad. I've heard so much about you. And you must be the husband who can't satisfy his wife. The crowd went dead silent. Even the kids at the nearby ring toss game stopped what they were doing to stare at us. I smiled. Funny you should mention satisfaction, Chad. How's business going? I heard Millbrook Digital Solutions is having some performance issues. His face went red. My business is doing fine. Really? Because I heard you've been turned down for loans 3 times in the past 6 months. Something about cash flow problems and a history of failed ventures. But hey, I'm sure Lydia doesn't mind dating a guy who's hemorrhaging money. She's very understanding about financial difficulties. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I pulled out my phone and started reading from the screen. According to the State Business Registry, Millbrook Digital Solutions owes back taxes in the amount of $47,000. There's also a pending lawsuit from your former business partner alleging fraud and misappropriation of funds. Chad's face went from red to white. Where did you get that information? Public records, Chad. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look. Lydia was staring at Chad with an expression I'd never seen before. It was the look of a woman realizing she'd bet on the wrong horse. Is that true? She asked him quietly. It's complicated, Chad said. These things always look worse on paper than they actually are. $47,000 in back taxes looks pretty bad any way you slice it, I said helpfully. The crowd was eating this up. I could see people pulling out their phones to record everything, and I knew this would be all over social media within the hour. Chad must have realized he was losing the crowd because he decided to try a different approach. Look, Tom, I understand you're upset, but Lydia and I are in love. We didn't plan for this to happen, but sometimes these things just... Love, I interrupted. Is that what we're calling it? Because based on these text messages, it seems more like you two are just really good at disappointing each other in hotel rooms. Someone in the crowd snorted with laughter, and suddenly everyone was laughing. Chad's face went red again, and I could see him struggling to maintain his composure. You're pathetic, he said to me. No wonder she left you. Maybe, but at least I'm not a broke con artist who preys on married women. That's when Chad made his mistake. He took a swing at me. I saw it coming from a mile away. Chad might have been taller than me, but he had the soft, untested look of a man who'd never been in a real fight in his life. I sidestepped his clumsy punch easily, and his momentum carried him forward into the dunk tank that had been set up for the charity fundraiser. The crowd erupted in cheers and laughter as Chad surfaced, sputtering and humiliated, his perfect hair plastered to his head. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Looks like he got dunked," and everyone laughed even harder. Lydia stood there staring at the whole scene, her face cycling through embarrassment, anger, and something that might have been regret. Finally, she turned and pushed through the crowd, heading for the parking lot. Aubrey started to follow her, but then stopped and looked back at me. You know, Tom, I always thought Lydia was crazy for wanting to leave you. Now I'm starting to think she might have been right about needing a change. She hurried after Lydia, leaving Chad to climb out of the dunk tank by himself while the crowd continued to laugh and take pictures. I packed up my booth early and headed home, feeling better than I had in months. But as I was pulling into my driveway, I noticed something tucked under my windshield wiper. It was an envelope with no return address. Inside were photos. Photos of Lydia and Chad at various locations around town, but also something else. In one of the pictures taken at a restaurant, Lydia was clearly reaching into Chad's wallet while he was distracted by his phone. There was a note attached. Thought you should know what kind of woman you married. A friend. I stared at the photos for a long time, my mind racing. Someone was watching Lydia and Chad, documenting their activities. But who? And why were they helping me? More importantly, what was Lydia really up to? The answer came 2 days later when Detective Ray Flanagan knocked on my door. Ray and I had gone to high school together, and he'd been a regular customer at my garage for years. He was a decent cop and a straight shooter, which made his presence on my doorstep particularly concerning. "Hey, Ray," I said, opening the door. "What brings you by? Truck acting up again? Afraid this isn't a social call, Tom? Mind if I come in?" I led him to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee. Ray looked uncomfortable, which wasn't like him. He was usually pretty direct about police business. "So what's this about?" I asked. "Your wife filed a complaint against you yesterday. Says you've been stalking her and harassing her boyfriend." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Stalking her? Ray, she's my wife, or was anyway." I know. And between you and me, I think this is all bullshit. But I have to follow up on complaints. You know how it is." "What exactly is she claiming I did?" Ray pulled out a small notebook and flipped through it. "Let's see." "She says you've been following her around town, that you sabotaged her car, that you publicly humiliated her at the Harbor Festival, and that you've been spreading lies about Chad Larkin's business." "Lies? Everything I said about his business is public record." "I know, I checked. But Tom, did you disable her car remotely?" I looked at Ray for a long moment, weighing my options. He was a friend, but he was also a cop doing his job. The car has a security system that can shut down the ignition if it's reported stolen. I may have accidentally triggered it. Accidentally? These new systems are very sensitive. Ray closed his notebook and sighed. "Look, Tom, I've known you for 20 years. You're not a stalker, and you're not the kind of guy who would hurt a woman. But Lydia's got herself a lawyer now, and they're talking about restraining orders and harassment charges." "A lawyer? That's fast work for someone who just moved out 3 days ago." "Chad Larkin's lawyer, actually. Guy named Morrison from Portland. Real expensive suit, real expensive attitude." That was interesting. Chad was broke, according to the public records I'd found, but he could afford a high-end lawyer from Portland. Something didn't add up. "Ray, can I show you something?" I went to my computer and pulled up the tracking data from Lydia's car, along with the photos someone had left on my windshield. This is from the GPS tracker in Lydia's car. See these timestamps? She's been staying at Chad's place every night since she moved out, not at Aubrey's like she told everyone. Ray studied the data. Okay, so she lied about where she was staying. Not exactly a crime. Look at these photos. I showed him the pictures of Lydia reaching into Chad's wallet. Someone's been watching them, documenting their activities. And look at this one. The photo I showed him was taken outside the First National Bank. Lydia was walking out with Chad, and she was carrying what looked like a bank deposit bag. Ray, I think my wife and her boyfriend are running some kind of scam. Chad's company is broke, but somehow he can afford an expensive lawyer and a fancy apartment. And Lydia's got access to our joint accounts, at least until the divorce is final. Ray frowned. You think she's stealing from you to fund his business? I think they're stealing from someone. The question is who? Ray stood up and paced around my kitchen. Tom, I need you to be very careful here. If you're right about this, then Lydia and Chad are potentially dangerous. And if you're wrong, you could be looking at serious harassment charges. I understand. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're obsessed with your ex-wife and her new boyfriend. The GPS tracking, the public humiliation, the digging into his business records. It doesn't look good. He was right, of course. From the outside, my behavior probably did look like stalking. But I knew I was onto something bigger than just a simple affair. Ray, give me 48 hours. If I can't prove that something illegal is going on, I'll back off completely. I'll even apologize to Lydia publicly if that's what it takes. Ray studied my face for a long moment. 48 hours, Tom. After that, I have to take official action. After Ray left, I called Mickey and asked him to come over. If I was going to figure out what Lydia and Chad were really up to, I was going to need help. Mickey arrived an hour later with a bag of tools and a grin on his face. So, boss, what kind of trouble are we getting into? I explained the situation, showing him the photos and the financial records I'd found on Chad's company. So you think they're running a con game? Mickey asked. I think they're running multiple con games. Chad's company is a front for something, and Lydia's helping him. The question is, what and who they're targeting. How do we find out? I smiled. We're going to do a little late-night reconnaissance. You still have that lockpick set from your misspent youth? Mickey's grin widened. Boss, you're talking my language. That night, we waited until 2 a.m. and then drove to Chad's apartment building. The Harbor Towers complex was supposed to have security, but like most things in Millbrook, it was more for show than actual protection. Mickey had us inside the building in less than 5 minutes. Chad's apartment was on the second floor, and according to the GPS tracker, Lydia's car was in the parking garage, which meant they were both home. We climbed the stairs quietly and listened at Chad's door. I could hear the TV playing and the sound of voices, but they seemed to be settled in for the night. What now? Mickey whispered. I pulled out my phone and showed him the building's layout, which I'd downloaded from the management company's website. Chad's apartment has a balcony that faces the harbor. There's a maintenance ladder that goes up to the roof. We can get a look inside from above. Mickey looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Boss, that's breaking and entering. We could go to jail. We're not entering, just breaking. And we're not stealing anything, just gathering information. That's not how the law works. Mickey, in 46 hours, Ray Flanagan is going to arrest me for stalking my own wife. This is my only chance to prove that something bigger is going on here. Mickey sighed. You're crazy, you know that? Probably. You in? Hell yes. The maintenance ladder was right where the building plan said it would be, and it took us directly to the roof above Chad's apartment. From there, we could look down onto his balcony and see into his living room through the sliding glass doors. What we saw made my blood run cold. Chad and Lydia were sitting at his dining room table with stacks of papers spread out in front of them. But they weren't alone. There were 2 other people with them, an elderly man I didn't recognize and a woman who looked familiar but I couldn't place. Mickey pulled out a small pair of binoculars he'd brought and handed them to me. Get a better look at what they're doing. Through the binoculars, I could see that the papers on the table were contracts of some kind. Chad was pointing at different sections while the elderly man nodded and signed documents. Lydia was taking photos of each signed page with her phone. It's some kind of signing ceremony, I whispered to Mickey. But I can't tell what they're signing. That's when the woman turned toward the window, and I got a clear look at her face. It was Mrs. Henderson, who lived in the assisted living facility on the other side of town. I'd done work on her son's car a few months ago, and she'd been there when he picked it up. She was in her 80s and had mentioned that her late husband had left her a substantial inheritance. Mickey, I said, my voice tight with anger, I think we're looking at an elder fraud operation. What do you mean? That old man and woman down there, they're being scammed. Chad and Lydia are getting them to sign over money or property or something. Mickey took the binoculars and looked for himself. Jesus, Tom, we need to call the cops. With what evidence? We're trespassing on a roof, spying on people through their windows. Ray would arrest us before he'd arrest them. So what do we do? I thought for a moment, watching Chad and Lydia work their con game on 2 vulnerable elderly people. We're going to give them exactly what they deserve, but we're going to do it smart. What's the plan? I smiled, and I could feel the darkness in it. We're going to destroy them, publicly, completely. And we're going to make sure everyone in town sees it happen. The next morning, I started making phone calls. The first was to Dave Porter at the local newspaper. The second was to Mrs. Henderson's son. The third was to the State Attorney General's office, Elder Fraud Division. By noon, I had all the pieces in place for Lydia and Chad's final performance. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was spring it. That evening, I sent a text to Lydia. I want to apologize for my behavior. Can we meet at the Mariner's Lie tonight at 8? I'll buy you and Chad dinner and we can talk like adults. She responded within minutes. Fine. But no more drama, Tom. I'm serious. I smiled as I typed back. No drama. I promise. It was the first lie I'd told in our entire marriage. At 7:45, I was at the Mariner's Lie, sitting at a table near the back with a clear view of the entrance. Mickey was at the bar, and Mrs. Fenwick was at her usual table by the window. Dave Porter was in a corner booth with his camera, pretending to read a magazine. Detective Flanagan was at the bar in plain clothes, officially off duty, but keeping an eye on things. At exactly 8 p.m., Lydia and Chad walked in, looking like they owned the place. Lydia had dressed down for the occasion, probably trying to look humble and forgiving. Chad was wearing his usual expensive casual wear, his hair perfectly styled. They sat down across from me, and Lydia gave me what she probably thought was a warm smile. Tom, I'm glad you called. I think it's time we handled this situation like mature adults. I couldn't agree more, I said. Can I get you both something to drink? Just water for me, Lydia said. Beer, Chad said. Whatever you have on tap. I signaled the waitress and placed their order, then leaned back in my chair. So, Lydia, how are you adjusting to your new life? Making new friends. It's been an adjustment, but I'm happy, really happy. That's wonderful. And Chad, how's business? I heard things were looking up for Millbrook Digital Solutions. Chad's eyes narrowed slightly, but he kept his voice casual. Business is good. We've got some new clients, some new revenue streams. Things are definitely looking up. New revenue streams? That sounds exciting. What kind of work are you doing now? Consulting mostly, helping local businesses optimize their operations. There's a lot of untapped potential in this town. I'll bet there is, especially among the older residents. They probably need a lot of help with technology and financial planning. Lydia and Chad exchanged a quick glance, and I knew I'd hit the mark. Well, Lydia said, Chad has been very generous with his time, helping people who might otherwise be taken advantage of by unscrupulous companies. How noble of him. Speaking of helping people, I ran into Mrs. Henderson's son today. You remember Mrs. Henderson, don't you, Chad? Elderly lady, lives at Sunset Manor? Chad's face went pale. I'm not sure I know who you mean. Really? Because according to her son, you and Lydia have been spending a lot of time with her lately. Something about investment opportunities and estate planning. Tom, Lydia said, her voice tight with warning. What are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that you and your boyfriend here have been running a con game on elderly residents, getting them to sign over their money and property. The entire bar went dead silent. Every conversation stopped, every head turned toward our table. Chad stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. Sit down, Chad, I said calmly. We're just getting started. That's when Dave Porter stood up from his corner booth, camera in hand. Chad Larkin, I'm Dave Porter from the Millbrook Gazette. Would you care to comment on the allegations that you and Lydia Bishop have been defrauding elderly residents? Chad's mouth fell open. This is a setup. Yes, it is, I said. And it's about to get a lot worse. Detective Flanagan appeared at our table, his badge visible on his belt. Mr. Larkin, Mrs. Bishop, I need to speak with both of you about some complaints we've received regarding elder fraud. Lydia looked around the bar wildly, realizing that everyone was staring at them, that people were recording everything with their phones, that her carefully constructed new life was falling apart in real time. Tom, you bastard, she hissed. You planned this. I did, just like you planned to steal money from old people who trusted you. Chad made a break for the door, but Mickey was there to block his path. Where are you going, Chad? Party's just getting started. That's when everything went to hell. Chad tried to push past Mickey, Lydia started screaming at me, and Detective Flanagan was trying to restore order while half the bar was recording everything on their phones. In the chaos, Chad managed to slip past Mickey and run for the exit. I followed him outside, where he was fumbling with his car keys in the parking lot. Going somewhere, Chad? He spun around, his face twisted with rage and panic. You destroyed everything. Do you have any idea how much money you just cost me? Money you stole from elderly people who trusted you. They were just sitting on it. They didn't need it. And you did? I had plans. Big plans. I was going to build something real here. You were going to build a criminal enterprise on the backs of vulnerable old people. Chad pulled out his phone and started dialing. I'm calling my lawyer. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. I held up my own phone, which had been recording our entire conversation. Thanks for the confession, Chad. He stared at me for a moment, then lunged forward, trying to grab my phone. We struggled for a few seconds, but Chad was soft and out of shape, and I'd been working with my hands my entire life. I easily pushed him away, and he stumbled backward, tripping over a parking curb and landing hard on the asphalt. He lay there for a moment, breathing hard, his expensive clothes torn and dirty. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. I looked down at him, feeling nothing but disgust. You're done, Chad. Both of you. Detective Flanagan appeared in the parking lot with Lydia in handcuffs. She was crying now, her makeup running down her face, all her carefully constructed composure gone. Tom, she sobbed, please, we can work this out. We can go back to the way things were. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I'd been married to for 8 years. This stranger who'd been living in my house and sharing my bed while planning to rob elderly people. No, Lydia, we can't. You wanted space to find yourself. Well, congratulations. You found out you're a criminal. Ray Flanagan loaded both of them into his patrol car while the crowd from the bar watched from the doorway. Mrs. Fenwick was practically vibrating with excitement, already planning how she was going to tell this story to everyone in town. As the patrol car drove away, Mickey walked over and stood beside me. So, boss, what now? I looked around the parking lot, at the crowd of people who'd witnessed the whole thing, at the bar where I'd just destroyed my wife's life and my marriage in one carefully orchestrated evening. Now we go home, Mickey. And tomorrow, we get back to work. Just like that. Just like that. But as I drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, I knew nothing would ever be just like anything again. I'd gotten my revenge, proven that Lydia and Chad were criminals, and probably saved several elderly residents from being scammed. I should have felt satisfied, vindicated, victorious. Instead, I just felt empty. I pulled into my driveway and sat in my truck for a long time, looking at the house that had been our home, that was now just my house. Tomorrow, the whole town would be talking about what had happened. Lydia and Chad would be facing criminal charges. My marriage would be officially over. I'd won. So why did it feel like I'd lost everything? I got out of the truck and walked to my front door, fishing for my keys. That's when I saw it. Another envelope tucked under my doormat. Inside was a single photo of me and Mickey on Chad's roof the night before, clearly taken from another building. There was a note attached. Nice work. But you're not the only one who knows how to plan ahead. A friend. I stared at the photo for a long time, my mind racing. Someone had been watching me just like I'd been watching Lydia and Chad. Someone who knew what I was planning before I did it. Someone who was still out there, still watching, still playing a game I didn't understand. I looked around the empty street, but saw nothing. No movement, no suspicious cars, no signs of surveillance. But I could feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. The game wasn't over after all.